Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. Today in the show, we have Vanessa LeMaistre. Really exciting conversation. It's a very different episode than normal, covering kind of like this more spiritual angle, spiritualism, mediumship, psychedelics, shamanism, and much more. Really fun conversation. Super happy that Vanessa joined us and reached out. Really exciting kind of path too, and some kind of overlap between what I've been up to personally and what she's been up to. So it's just really fun. Kind of talk a lot about how could we integrate this stuff better, like how bad suffering is for a lot of folks right now. Well, I guess always is pretty bad, and much more. So I hope you like it. And yeah, I think that's it for now. So thanks again, Vanessa, and we'll see you on the other side. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. I'm here with Vanessa LeMaistre. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Really excited. So you reached out a little while ago and shared a pretty interesting story with me about your kind of development coming from not really being aware of psychedelics to becoming, quite integral to your life, it seems, and pretty large awakening. But like, how do we want to talk about your story? So you're originally from Miami, you're living in Los Angeles, and you did a degree in Naropa. So that's pretty good. but what else do you like to really add into your story?
I mean, I love how you introduced it because it's true. Like it wasn't very familiar for me, growing up, just being a Black woman. I think a lot of Black people, it's not really common, the word psychedelics, or it's known for us to kind of view it as like, oh, that's like, or what I've heard people in the hood say, oh, like that's, like a white person's drug. I don't mess with that. So there's just a lack of knowledge and experience. And so, yeah, not coming from being experienced about it and then having a deep awakening, I think is like a really great way to put it.
Yeah. Right. Like in a lot of the traditions, there's this idea that you're born and you might like have been fated to be some sort of shaman. Right. And you like, don't really know, but it's going to emerge one way or the other. And in the jungle, like in the Amazonian traditions, at times they have like a good framework for that. They can catch these people and go, oh, you should probably go study with these two people because they went through this same thing when they were growing up and they can help you. But we don't necessarily have that here in America. Like there's a couple traditions, but it sounds like you were able to, turbulent as hell, but you landed. Like, cool. So like, maybe let's talk about like, when did you first have it hinted at you that you might have like a bigger kind of shamanic story going?
Hint? I'd say like when I was a kid, like I didn't really know I was different because I was just me, but people who were close to me would be like, you're really deep. And they would kind of like, they didn't ostracize me, but I'm sensitive. So I'd say like as a kid, but then like also just having a deep, inquisitive, philosophical mind. Like when I was 7, and I talk about this sometimes, but like, I saw a dog on my way home as I was walking and I was like, oh, I wonder what he was before. Was he a koala bear? Because I just learned the animal. So those were little hints. I had always been spiritual, but I didn't really have a hint until I started to get to know myself more. Like when I was around 21, I became really free spirited and I was just talking to everyone and really curious and just full of life. And I started to get to know myself more and I started to realize like, I do operate a little bit differently. So those were like the little hints.
Right. And so I noticed in your website, you talk about going to India. Like, was there like a big push internally for you to go there? Or was it mostly the yoga culture or what was going on there?
It's interesting. Like as I was diving into my spiritual practices on my journey, I got into yoga and I fell in love the first time I tried it. And so I got trained to teach yoga. And I was like, I don't really like teaching yoga, but I want to keep deepening my studies. And the trip synchronistically happened on my birthday. And it was just so aligned with where I was spiritually. And it's hard to put in words and contextualize the magic of India, but where it takes you on a spiritual level, I mean, considering the fact that it's like literally on our equilibrium, in the middle of our hemisphere, like geographically, it says a lot. And so much came from my experiences there, from dreams to, I'm talking about vivid dreams with powerful lessons for me, to hiking for the first time up 20,000 feet high in the Himalayas
That's a lot.
to where I cried. You know, it was my first hike ever. So these things were super transformative for me. Just meditating on the Ganges, jumping into the Ganges. I would have these magical, mystical experiences that I couldn't really explain to people or put in words, but I was aware that they were extraordinary.
That's great. Kind of a trivial question, but did you get sick in India?
Did I get sick? The second time I did, on my way back, as soon as I got through Frankfurt airport, I got sick.
But not directly from swimming in the river, which like it seems like an amazing thing, but it seems so scary for me. But I've seen a lot of videos of how amazing it is for a lot of people.
Really?
And I'm just like,
Why?
Yeah. Just the disease load in the river is super high. And I'm not confident it's going to protect me. Like I've seen plenty of people swim in it in videos, so I know it's like relatively safe for a lot of people, but I'm like, maybe someday. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Like having all these experiences, not necessarily having like elders or like a framework for how to couch these things. And that's, I think that's kind of for people with these emergent stories, like that's kind of common, right? Like you don't necessarily have that company or help.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like ancient, like throughout our times, you're right. Like a lot of times you don't, or it's like the dead mother who's guiding the person that's alive, you know? And I sometimes think my son who's crossed over is a guide for me in that unique way because he was like, his energy was crazy. Like he was like too good for this realm. And, so I do, but I'm finally coming to terms with accepting that, you know what, maybe there is no elder. I have been burned by so many people that are quote unquote spiritual leaders who are charlatans or frauds, and they're posing as something, and then they might get threatened by the power that I bring, or they're afraid that I'm going to catch them, And so I've just kind of taken it as, let me learn as much as I can from what I don't want to be, and accept that maybe there are no elders, and I'm on the verge of becoming an elder myself.
Right. Like I think for a lot of folks, like that is or should maybe be considered as one of your goals. Like how can you take on this role of eldership?
Right.
And develop to the point where you can be that person that you didn't have.
Right.
Yeah. Like I thankfully fell into a community in around 2003, which is really great for me. But I can only imagine what it would have been like for me if I did not. Like I might have got a lot more hurt a lot earlier or died, like my behavior was not really okay. Like shamanic initiation or like spiritual initiations can be fatal.
Yeah.
It's no joke.
I mean, you said you had your experiences, and I know like just coming through that kind of healing, a lot of times, if you don't wake up to your call, they've said that you could even die so you can be reborn into a life that's going to allow you to step into that calling.
Right. Yeah, that is a pretty common story. I'm actually just listening to a book right now called LSD in the Mind of the Universe, Diamonds from Heaven by this guy, Chris Bachet, who did a number of books on reincarnation. And like, I think he does a good job in this book talking about it because I think it's wildly complex. Like it's more complex than we're able to really language, I think, how that really operates. But, I don't doubt that there's something there. It's just so hard to talk about. Yeah. But yeah, like why not? Like, okay, you failed this time. Let's give you some pain and you can start over. That's like the shamanic thing is like a wounded healer. Like you've got to have this big injury of some kind before you come back. I think the Greek archetype is Chiron, the wounded healer, and pretty big in astrology. So it's like, yeah, like once you have these wounds, you can come and like somehow that's where the magic comes through. Like your wounds come through or are the holes which with the light comes emanates or whatever. Yeah. So I'm kind of interested if you could share like a little bit about how like, so you mentioned earlier you had an experience where someone told you were a shaman and this kind of just kept popping up. Like, how do you like to talk about that?
I'm almost getting tired of talking about it because I'm like, does this sound like crazy? Like, I don't even know what it sounds like to people, but I mean, it is what it is, and it helps me sometimes because I literally cry sometimes because I get confused, not confused. I feel a lot of pressure, especially right now going through this global crisis, especially just having the recent training I did in my resilient leadership graduate program, it does feel like a lot of pressure, but that also does help guide me. It helps me feel like, you know what, there's some trust here in your path. Just trust this, even though you don't get it, even though you feel like you have to do a lot that you don't know how, it's challenging. But, I do remind myself that, you know what, Vanessa, not everybody gets told that they're a shaman and that they don't have a choice. Now, I have encountered a few people that did get callings and they came to me worried, and I would tell them, listen to that calling. When spirit gives you a calling, you listen, and so for me, like, just to sum it up, like, when I was 21, a guy read my palm for free, and he started off actually talking to me about my brother. That's when I was just like, okay, I'm going to shut up and listen to him, because my brother and I were at odds at that time. And I care about, he's my younger brother. And this guy was telling me, you're his sister for a reason. One day you might have to really help him. And if you have to take him really far away from this country to show him that he can do it, you have to do that. And so then he tells me that I'm a shaman and I don't have a choice. And it's funny because he actually read my cousin's palm and told her that she was going to be a doctor and have a bunch of kids. She was studying math, and right now she has a PhD in epidemiology, and she has her second child. So, wow. He was definitely gifted because he did it for free. He wasn't looking for money, but I didn't listen, and I was just living my life. Because the thing is that I've always been really spiritual, but also very modern. And I was in Miami Beach, and I grew up fast in Miami, and I was traveling, And so after I was just doing all of that and then still deepening my spiritual practice naturally, it wasn't until I moved to LA and then I had my son Kamden at the age of 30, who was the biggest blessing in my life, totally rocked my world. And he taught me so much. But then when I found out he had a fatal disease, I was only 30 years old. And I'm like, are you kidding me? You're telling me I have to go through like the hardest thing. Like, and I had already gone through adversity. So I knew I was pretty confident I could handle it, what was coming my way, but it was also stepping into the unknown on a whole other level. And so it wasn't until that happened when I was like, you know what, I'm going to listen to this calling. I don't want to end up with cancer or something else catastrophic, knock on wood, but I just don't want any of that. And then, like you said, like it did keep popping up, and I ended up in a mediumship class so I'll do all these like intuitive things and they come very naturally for me, but a lot of me understands that it's not even really me. So I think a lot of the spirituality is understanding that it's not ego. It's not, oh, look at me, I'm so gifted and talented. It's more like, oh, what are these modalities that I can tap into and perceive on a higher realm and a higher level consciously, And so I was in this mediumship class, and this woman was blindfolded, and we were doing a practice, and she goes, oh, I'm doing a past life regression for you. And you were in the West, and you were a shaman, and you were really crying, and you were depressed because you knew you had so much responsibility for people. And I couldn't understand intellectually what she was saying, but my soul knew. And so like, it's just been too many dots,
Yeah, that's really interesting. Wow. And then you traveled to the Amazon, and they immediately kind of also recognized that. Well, back up a moment. Like when did you first get exposed to the idea of ayahuasca? Like how did that come on your radar?
Oh, so interesting. So I was living in DC. Okay. Like I moved there in 2017. So just 2 years ago, 2.5, whatever. 3. And I was at a crossroads. And so I'm the type of person where I don't judge if people get readings done. I was at a crossroads. I got a tarot reading done. And this was the first reading I got done where I was like, whatever this person says, I'm just going to listen because I'm so lost. And she was like, even though you're spiritual, you're also intellectual. What about this school? And she's like, you're going to be doing something different. You're going to be working with plants. And I said, plants? What are you talking about? Plants? I couldn't understand. I like plants. I love them, but I couldn't get it. So I go to Colorado 6 months later, and within like 2 months of being there, someone invites me to what I interpret as cacao. So I thought it was a cacao ceremony. And it's nighttime where there's like a fire in the middle, and I'm like wondering, why are they giving me green powder? And I'm like, okay. But then I saw them give me a black paste. So I'm like, okay, maybe this is the chocolate, whatever. And I had a very intense experience to the point where the person leading the group was like, are you okay? And that made me feel better and get more grounded. But it was a really transformative night for me. And I went home and I just jotted down all of my experience. I was like, wow, I love cacao. It's amazing. So then a week later, I'm on the phone with this guy who had dreads down to his ankles, older dude, Atuab. And I'm like, hey, Atuab, that cacao ceremony, he's like, cacao? Vanessa, that was not cacao. He was like, that's coca from the cocaine plant. It's an indigenous plant that we use in the Amazon, and it's called mambe, and we mix it with ambil, which is the tobacco paste. And from that moment on, my whole world changed. I was up in the mountains every other week in ceremony, doing these plant medicine circles. And it was when the person conducting them flew in a guy from Peru that I was exposed to ayahuasca for my first sitting.
Well, that's really cool. That's my time with the ayahuasca was with a group that flew up some Shipibo folks. And I thought it was amazing. Just like their level of skill. Not to mention just like the quality of some ayahuascas like that. It was just extraordinary. And thankfully, this group, I think, had been operating for over 20 years before I showed up. So I was like, okay, perfect. Like you definitely got some mileage. And how was your first session? Was it like extreme? Was it gentle? Amazing?
It was all of the above that you just mentioned. It was the most spiritual experience of my entire life. I have never seen the veil so thin to where I was getting premonitions, prophecies. The next day, the guy was like, you need to pay attention to these prophecies you're getting. Because I thought that was like a normal thing, which I think it is for a lot of people who partake in these. But it was very enlightening in the sense that I had a big impairment. And I'll just be transparent here. I had a big impairment on a personal level with accepting my physical appearance. And I had a lot of complexities around understanding that I was beautiful. And this night, it showed me who I was, what I need to do, and really started this process of coming into accepting myself as I am.
Well, that's wonderful. Yeah. And really important, right? It's kind of essential. Like a lot of us in America are not okay with body image. And, like it's at the same time, it's tragic. It's also kind of comical. You see these people that are like super beautiful and you're like, you probably don't think you're beautiful at all.
Right.
And it's like tough. And, just the fact that you're a human, like that kind of makes you beautiful to start with, right? Like people just going through similar struggles and amazing skills sometimes. Like there's so many beautiful things that people express. Yeah. So, well, that's really an interesting way that unfolded for you. And so what happened after that? Like, how did you get kind of deeper into your spiritual path or shamanism or however you like to phrase it?
It happened really fast, actually. This was all within a matter of a few months. And the guy who I sat with that they flew in from Peru, his name is Javi, and he was interesting because he's from Spain, came to America, got his doctorate's degree in biology, and was like, I'm not dealing with America. I'm going to the jungles and I'm studying medicine. So the people who he sat with to study for the past 8 years is who he referred me to go do my dieta. So I knew that I had a lot of heart healing that I needed to focus on, naturally so. And so I ended up going to Pocapa last summer, actually, and had the most amazing 2-week experience. And it was challenging. Like the first 3 nights were euphoric and it was blissful. And I felt so empowered. But then like the 4th night, I was having a nervous breakdown because I could not believe the amount of atrocity that I saw within my personal life that I needed to heal and to work through and to look at. And I broke down and I cried to the shaman. I'm like, why is it showing me all of this? And he was like, you need to be grateful because this is a gift. So I had a deep experience, and not to mention the trauma that came with the tests. Like there's tests that these dietas will give you and impose on you. And mine was pretty intense, being in the jungle and encountering and dealing with a participant in the group who had a much more difficult time and was not willing. He didn't want to go through the healing process. So it made it difficult for everybody, but particularly me. He was just like targeting me. So I had to really try my best to make the experience the best that I could.
So like physically, like coming at you with, like touching or like verbal accosting, or what was going on there?
So the interesting thing that I'm learning about these spiritual circles is, that veil, that it's so thin and it's such a spiritual experience that there's other entities, when people talk about demons, I'm starting to feel like a lot of my work will be around some form of extractions because I'm getting signs around that. And so this person had, usually if you do have an energy attachment, when you drink ayahuasca, it will reveal itself. It really can't hide. And so this person who was directly next to me every night in ceremony, and his tambo was set up right next to mine. The maestro said it's not coincidence that this was supposed to happen and this was a challenge for you. But this entity that was attached to him was notorious, and it was volatile, and it was aggressive. And every other night when I was not sitting in ceremony, because we sat in every other night. So the nights that I wasn't sitting, I could not sleep because he was harassing me by my tent. And he was, this demonic voice would come out, it was real. If I slept for 30 minutes, this entity was trying to play with me in my sleep. And I've never had to use so much protection. I mean, I was going back to Catholic prayers that I grew up learning in Catholic school to protect myself because it was really intense.
So we don't talk about this too much on the show, but like we've discussed, using like sage, Palo Santo, things like tobacco smoke for cleansing.
Yes.
I know there's a gazillion rituals for clearing energy, and prayers do seem to work. Like in a lot of the literature around exorcisms, like Catholic exorcisms somehow seem to work, like something about it seems to operate. And like, I don't know, like, do you have any kind of things you like to point out about kind of like protection or
Absolutely.
kind of repelling these things?
It's interesting. I mean, I think anything of those higher vibratory frequencies are going to be good, whether it's a clear crystal or a white candle or sage or Palo Santo. Florida water is great. This guy in particular, they tried offering him Florida water, and every time they mentioned it, he would like shake his head, roll his eyes. But that is, clearing, but also just even envisioning white light around you or picturing your aura being protected. A really great friend of mine who's actually into psychedelics named Azul, he's getting a PhD in psychedelics. And he basically told me something called the permission of roses, which is, you just basically envision roses coming in towards you, but around you, there's a ring with the thorns going out. That's been really helpful for someone like me who's built my energy to the capacity it's at now and has to come back to LA, which is La La Land / the devil's playground. I feel it a lot more now that I'm more in tuned, having left for 2 years and being exposed to plant medicines on this level. It was interesting because after Peru, after those 2 weeks, I changed a lot, and it wasn't from doing the medicine. It was the integration process and how deep of an experience it was and how challenging it was for me helped me change, but then like very quickly, shortly after, I got really exposed to my ancestors and tapping into the lineage of spirituality that my family's into, which it's going to look different for me. It's not going to look traditional. But there are like psychedelics in that realm and plants in that realm. And this is a little out there, but like there's a myth, but not so much a myth because a professor from Harvard went to Haiti to find out what is this talk about zombies. So apparently there's like a thing there where people can become zombies, and they use a psychedelic fish. Like it's a poison from the puffer fish.
This is coming out in a podcast we have recently. Wade Davis, the famous anthropologist, spent a bunch of time in Haiti with the different voodoo groups. And, he speaks about it really kindly. And I think he wrote a bunch of books, and he did dig into the zombie topic quite a bit.
Yes.
It's really interesting. And Wade Davis is his name, and that should be out in a couple weeks. He made me hold it for months to coincide with a book release. I was like, I can't wait to get this thing out. It's so amazing. Like the voodoo topic is amazing. So like, did you kind of grow up around that kind of in Miami?
It's so interesting. So my family, they're very mixed. So my mom is half French. She's the one who raised me. My dad is half Lebanese. But my mother, being of that French descent, it's very strong in her. So coming from another country to America, it's very much white is right. It's very much the American dream. So they completely sheltered me. They literally raised me telling me, we know nothing about this. That is like lower to class. We don't know anything about it. And so I've had to recently try to forgive that, because that kind of sheltering, I mean, if anybody in our generation, has a child that they see has these spiritual gifts or they like crystals, most people in our generation, I feel like, would support that. But I didn't have that luxury. And so, no, I was not exposed. But it was after Peru. I did a reading, and the guy was like, Vanessa, your ancestors are really calling you right now. And that happened really quickly. I immediately connected with voodoo and realized, oh my gosh, if I'm called to be a shaman, I'm called to do voodoo in some aspect. And in my country, when I told my grandmother, because it was my grandmother who actually, she started crying to me when I told her I went to Peru. She's like, what are you doing going to the jungle is taking medicine? That's things that basically that voodoo people do. She knew.
Right.
You know, and then she also told me that in her country, you know, you don't choose that calling, it chooses you. Which
Right.
I think we can relate, like whether it's psychedelics or, you know, we're called in this way. It's not like we're like, hey, I want to get up and let me become a psychonaut research, you know, advocate or whatever.
Right. Yeah, you get it's some sort of attraction. Like you just get kind of pulled towards it. And yeah. I think I watched a documentary on Haiti recently, and it was like half Catholic, half voodoo. That's how they played it. And I was like, it's pretty
Sure.
awesome. Like the way I picture it, it's just a different way of having commerce with the spirits, like having a relationship with spirits. And it's a really old, really rich tradition. I don't really see anything spooky about it, but like when you're coming from the Catholic world, like of course, anything that's not Catholic is creepy. Yeah. And yeah, so have you like participated in any kind of traditional ceremonies since all this played out for you?
Yeah, like it all happened so quick. It's crazy. Like right after Peru, I started connecting with my ancestors, started connecting dots of Haitian voodoo, did my research. I was actually going through an initiation process. And so I actually ended up going to Haiti for the first time in March of this year. And when I went there, I was in ceremonies, and I won't go into too much detail, but long story short, things were not what I thought. And the person who was conducting the initiation was not the route that I need to go with. But I gained a lot of my own knowledge while going there. And I'm realizing a lot of my path is, it's not really so much fitting into someone else's tradition, but more so reconnecting those dots within me, relearning and remembering, you know, because I do know that my soul is old. And like the name that the Shipibo gave me is called Monique Kuna, which means, and the guy who gave it to me is blind. He was a blind maestro. And Monique Kuna means woman of old intelligence. So it's, I need to learn how to retrieve constantly from remembering.
Mm. Yeah, it's a really interesting thing, right? Like a lot of this stuff can just come to people. You don't even necessarily need to be under the influence of psychedelics. You can just have that connection somehow, and you're kind of just downloading things, and it seems functional and like helpful or just really interesting. You're like, should, for instance, like, oh, should I tell this person this thing I just heard about them or saw about them? Like, I don't know. Like, and you've probably got to feel all that out, right? Like, you're like, not sure. Yeah.
But I do think psychedelics helps with, and I forgot to mention too, like while this whole journey was going on with plants and getting exposed to psychedelics, I got introduced to microdosing. And so I've been doing that for the past 2 years. And that has been just so wonderful. I do the every fourth day, and I do it with chocolates. And it has been such a supportive role in my life and all of these plant medicines, because I learn the most through them. I'm able to see like what someone who's close to me might see, but they might not want to tell me because they don't want to hurt my feelings. You know, the plants are able to kind of just help me in that way, and like really learning how to respect them is something that I think like we're not taught. And I think it's so helpful. And just even like as we're changing and shifting through our times right now of, wait, what does our future look like as we're reconstructing it? I think a lot of us collectively are getting the hint at tapping into some of the industrial ways and looking at some of these older traditions who use, for example, plant medicines. You know, I think it's interesting that we're able to kind of tap into what that would be like in our everyday, and how that could reshape our future, or just even how we heal with ourselves and like our journey.
Right. Like I'm really interested in this idea of kind of like physiological brain healing, like real brain healing through microdosing, and like with the idea that psilocybin could and ayahuasca can help with neurogenesis, like new nerve cells, new synapses and connections. And like it'd be really cool to like see what happens if people microdosed like 10 different drugs. There's like 100 of them, 100 people. You just work them through each drug as a microdose series and see what you get at the end in terms of like perhaps concussion repair or like brain trauma repair, you know,
Right.
like some really interesting things that could happen with microdosing. I've yet to do it in series. Just the other day, I was like, I probably need to get on this kind of soon, but there's nothing really holding me back. So just got to go for it. And yeah, you know, I'm only critical of microdosing here and there when people try to like say, "Oh, we know it's amazing for everybody." It's like, well, you know, we don't know much, honestly. Like it's kind of under researched. And I like to try to balance this idea of like intuition and guessing, speculation with real data. Like based on real data, maybe we can do this. Or like based on these conversations, like, you know, you and many others have had with me about microdosing, like we could probably guess that it might help some people, but it's really hard to say it like in a really comfortable, measured way.
Sure. I mean, I agree. I mean, there's so much I don't know about it. And as I even just research on my own, like with my own personal experiences, I do wonder like, well, I don't know the negative sides, or I might know that and I might be in denial about them.
Right. Exactly. It's the only really serious negative risk that I've heard speculated at was this heart valve elongation that's possible. Really a rough speculation based on like this drug a lot of baseball players were using, fen. Apparently there's very similar it was like a stimulant that a lot of baseball players were using for a while, and some people died from it, from this heart valve elongation thing. Just gets your heart to the point where it stops pumping, like the blood pumping is just not working anymore, based on a couple things. And you know, I don't think the dosing on psilocybin mushrooms or LSD is high enough to trigger that. Like these people taking fen were taking enormous doses of fen. So I feel like it's physiologically quite safe, though there's going to be people where who it's not safe for sure.
This is an interesting one. I'm curious to see what more research develops around the heart, because I do notice, and just being totally transparent, I do notice like some peculiar things when I do microdose around the heart. Yeah.
Like palpitations or interesting feelings?
More so palpitations, heart flutters, irregular beating. And it's interesting because I do have the heart that I'm healing, my emotional side of my heart. And so sometimes I wonder if that's correlated. And I've spoken to a woman shaman who I used to sit with in plant circles, and she said, no, that's just the plant revealing to you what part of your body needs to be healed. So I'm not sure how to go about looking at that, but I am very aware just of like what's going on in my body and like when something feels different. And that is one of the things that I've steadily noticed as I microdose.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting. I'd like to hear how that develops for you. And I'm just curious if other people are experiencing that too with microdosing. I certainly get it when I drink too much coffee, but I don't necessarily think it's the same thing. And, the only, as far as I'm aware, the only like known cardiac risk with psychedelics, or like commonly known psychedelics, is ibogaine, or iboga, where it, I guess, elongates the electrical signal to the point where you could just end up in like almost like the heart's seizing and not pumping. But you can kind of screen really easily for that with a cardiologist. So they do some tests and they can interpret it really well to see if you're in a good situation for it. And people that are coming off of like a hard addiction, like their heart just might not be strong enough. Like it might just be that they're physically not well enough to do it. Yeah, which is really interesting and, kind of tragic in those cases. But, we got to, it's a really useful and important drug, but we've got to be careful with it.
Right.
And there's a lot of people microdosing it, which is interesting. So I'd be curious. Even traditionally in Gabon, they would microdose as part of their like normal culture. Pretty interesting. So we haven't talked about this too much on our show, but Michael Harner was a really good friend of Stan Groff. And Michael Harner, I think he's passed. I think he might have died a number of years ago, but he was like a really important figure for helping the West understand shamanism. And you get to go through his training program?
Mhm. I sure did.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Where was that?
Oh, it's amazing. So simultaneously to going to Naropa, I said I was going to follow my calling. So I was like, well, that's who I was drawn to. And I liked him. He was unique because he's American and he went to these Amazonian cultures and tribes, and he wasn't welcomed immediately, but they started to see him for who he was. And they saw he had these gifts and he was able to come up with these journeys. And I think he was a really intelligent guy. And so I like that all these cultures around the world were able to trust him and welcome him. And he was able to make this into a concise form for Americans to really understand and so we can use and utilize. It was so amazing. Like, I can't even describe how simplistic it is and practical it is and how beneficial shamanism is in general. And it's weird because, Michael Harner basically states that I could be getting the percentages wrong, but like it's 60% that uses trance through music to get to those trance-like states, and around 40% that does plant medicines. And I really see a correlation to both practices. I think they're kind of both in the same. You're getting the same experience to some extent, which is interesting.
Right. Like we were just recording about this earlier today. And I like to say it's more about just our human capacity than anything specifically about the drugs. Like there's nothing inherently magical, I think, about LSD, like or a lot of these other compounds. It's just we are that magical, and we can do, like, we're really big in holotropic breath work and Stan Grof's work. And I did probably six years of holotropic breath work before trying any psychedelics, and like I spent a lot of time doing some really intense work on myself. And when I finally got around to doing psychedelics, I was like, oh, really thankful I did all that stuff. Like, because it was pretty terrifying and really intense. But I got a long taste of what the stuff might be like before. Not to mention all the gazillion books I read and conversations I had. So, yeah, like for sure, these things are magical and can help us connect to certain things. But you can have any of these experiences on any number of compounds, and not even having compounds. Like, it's amazing.
It's amazing. Like, it's funny because like I was able to use some of the things I learned through Michael Harner's training while I was in the jungle in my dieta, just to protect myself, for instance, or just connecting with my power animals, which is interesting because then it helps me like understand just shamanism as a whole, and like even just like the history of shamanism and how symbolic animals were. But like in America, like we're raised and we're not taught like to really value animals and their spirits, or plants and their spirits, just so interesting.
Yeah, it's huge. It's really interesting. And it might have been Michael Harner. It might have been somebody else that did a lot of stuff in the Amazon. And they're like, yeah, we did like the spirit of the sky god. We did the spirit of earth, like all these rituals they did. And I think tomorrow we're going to do the spirit of the motorboat. And they're like, what? Well, it's like in a lot of these contexts, like everything has spirit and perhaps a unique aspect of spirit. A motorboat might be very different from the sky god, but perhaps, there's something there to learn.
Right. Absolutely. Yes.
So, like, was Michael Harner's work largely drumming and trance-induced drumming stuff?
Mostly, yes, I would say so. Even if you're doing like dream interpreting or getting the sense of like what a person needs to heal from, or guidance for them, yeah, all of it is pretty much drumming mostly.
That's great. And so Kyle, my business partner, did a bunch of training with a number of different people, but one was a Abenaki shaman Native American tribe from like Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, and Canada, and also some other people. But a big part of his practice is drumming, which really interests me. I've only really got to sit with somebody drumming for me like once or twice, but it was really, really powerful.
I mean, because you could do it too. Like you feel it, like you were able to journey and
oh yeah.
go through.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It was really impressive. I don't even think I've talked about that on the show. That was outside Boulder somewhere. Yeah, of
Of
course.
course, right?
What isn't around Boulder? Yeah. Well, and like how do you see that practice and training from like the Michael Harner program, like being incorporated by you kind of long term in your work?
It's interesting because it's definitely still formulating for me. But what I've found is something that I've practiced that has had really powerful, impactful results, and it's basically merging the drumming and sitting in council. So when I was in our leadership program, all of our classes were taught council style, basically the way Indigenous people hold councils. So there's that sense of equality, and it's not like, oh, I'm on a platform, bow down, listen to me. It's more like we're all on equal terms here. We can all learn from each other. So finding a way to really, I don't want to use the word showcase, but display, kind of show people that there's a way that we can come together in community through drumming and tapping into facilitating powerful questions, because all that's going to do is help you. So basically, like, I've had really successful results by asking people questions like, what is your deepest fear that you don't even want to state to yourself? And then we'll drum.
Mm,
And through drumming, they'll tap into their fears that they need to kind of face right now. And so that's the way
mm.
I plan to do it. And I'm really trying to get creative about it. And I have a manager, and she like wants me to get on, like, she wants me to hold exclusive parties for elite people, because they might not have access to something like this or even know about it, but it could be very beneficial, just for really anybody in my
Mm, yeah. That's really interesting. It's always a funny dichotomy, right? Like, do the rich people really need it? Do the elites really need it? And I think the answer is yes. But it's like, who are we leaving behind? Are we leaving them behind? Are we hopefully shaping a more equitable future
opinion.
by helping them?
Mm,
And I think that's part of the situation, right? Like,
wow.
let's turn you people on to like what's going on here on the planet and like
Right.
time to catch up now that you've got all this power.
That part. There's a
Yeah.
lot that needs to shift with like who has power and how can we basically maximize it, really.
Mm,
And I think a lot of it will
absolutely.
shift.
Right. Really kind of like tragic thing that I think about a lot is I think a study came out maybe 2 months ago suggesting that 1/7 of humans will be dehomed within 40 years. So like essentially a billion or more people will not have a home in 40 years due to climate change and like sea level rise. And the fact that we're not taking it seriously is like just kicking the can down the road to like a really tragic future. So like these people do have influence and could shift things. So we also do, like regular folks do too, but not to the degree they do.
Right.
But there's people that are just full on hurting. Like there's so much trauma out there.
My goodness. Especially right now. Like
Yeah.
right now. Like we're in it now. And it
Oh
blows my,
yeah.
like, there's this country I went to once called Bonaire, and there's not one homeless person there. And I remember asking, why is nobody homeless? And they're like, oh, we all open our doors to people. If you need a place, if you need food, and I just think our country specifically has no concept of what community is. Now, I feel like are an exception for being fortunate enough to have found a community, but that is so far and few for people I just encounter on a daily basis. They cannot say the same thing.
I agree. Yeah. It's really hard. Like it's such an individualistic culture.
Yes.
And like on one hand I like it, on the other hand it's causing so much harm, like and stuff like that. It's just tragic. I've spent a lot of time in Canada and it's like a totally different attitude.
Mm.
Largely. Like there's individuals who are like, "Oh, I'd love to be down there in America, clean up." I'm like, "Oh, good lord. All right. Good for you." But it's just really interesting to see like how, there's plenty of homeless people in Canada. It's not like Bonaire. But it's just really interesting to see. Yeah, tragic. Like I think this COVID situation alone, like us not having health care for all, like is causing so much crazy suffering.
Easy.
Right. And yeah, it's a complicated conversation. And are you seeing a lot of violence near you in Los Angeles, like with protests and whatnot?
Protests, yes, there was a lot of looting, but what I'm seeing a lot of, which is like so disheartening, is a lot of homelessness and a lot of drug use on the streets, like a lot of arms being shot up, you know, and it's sad. It is like so heartbreaking. Just even like with like, and this is my personal opinion, but like I think about this like every day, like with the government making promises of like, oh, we're going to give unemployed people $600, and then
Right.
that's too much. It breaks my heart because if you're saying that's too much, but you have people with four mouths to feed, kids, and like it just breaks my heart. I'm like, how are people surviving right now?
Barely, I think, is the answer for a lot of folks. Like, I think we're going to see a really big wave of homelessness in the next week or two, honestly, as people get evicted. I know in some states eviction's really hard, like California and Colorado, but in other states it's easy.
Right.
You know, it's going to be really tough. Yeah, and this is an interesting angle. So like you see people injecting drugs on the street. Like how do you interpret what's going on there with your kind of empathic abilities or whatever else you've got going on?
I see a lot. Like, I feel like I'm much more able to see when people have those energy attachments or whatever you want to call them, demons. I see that a lot more clearly now. So I see a lot of suffering in the soul. And in shamanism, like the way Michael Harner calls them is suffering spirits is what they're called that can attach because those spirits haven't gone into the light. So they tend to linger. And it's interesting because like, I get more inspired, you know, like I've been working on this book called Believe in Your Soul for 7 years now. And really like my goal is to one day be able to give it out to people like that for free. Hopefully one day I can give out a book like that for free. You know, I wish everybody could have like that one thing that they create that they can just give out to those people for free, whether it's a sticky pad, a note, a cookie, you know, cause like we've all been there and I can see like pain in them that I've seen in myself. You know, and it helps me to realize like I'm no better than anybody, you know, witnessing them, but it breaks my heart and like I'm really sensitive. But then I also see the value when I look at them. I think of the value of things like ayahuasca, like something like this can really help someone like that drastically.
Right. It's amazing how much it could help folks and like how far away that is. Earlier today I was chatting with this gentleman who's the CEO of this group in Canada, Therasil, and they were able to get a legal exemption from the Canadian government to provide therapeutic mushroom sessions to people suffering from end-of-life anxiety.
Oh, yes.
And apparently there's not loopholes, but allowances in their legal system where anybody can apply to use certain drugs if they're not getting help from conventional drugs.
Wow.
Right? So imagine what you could do in like Vancouver with ayahuasca or ibogaine or mushrooms or whatever, with like, you know, folks suffering from pretty severe addiction issues.
Right.
It'd be pretty extraordinary. And, you know, bring that same kind of healing to Los Angeles eventually. It would be amazing.
Oh my goodness.
So are you seeing like an increase in homelessness specifically in Los Angeles?
Yes, absolutely. Drastically. It's really evident and apparent. I was driving a friend who normally takes the train and she's like, oh, she freaked out. She's like, I didn't realize how many tents just popped up there because I'm so busy taking the train. It's pretty bad. Yeah, I'm not going to sugarcoat that. It is like really intense.
Heard there's like outbreaks of black plague in the homeless populations in Los Angeles, which is pretty creepy.
Whoa.
Especially this has been happening for years though. It's just, you know, it hasn't like blown up yet to the degree it could, which is good. But, you know, these diseases are like just a really good reason to get ahead of healthcare. Like you don't have to be super compassionate. Let's just be logical and like financially minded. Go like, it makes dollar sense to like provide free healthcare with all these pandemics that could come down.
Right. I mean, it's working so well for some countries.
Totally. Like, yeah, I think we're the only one that doesn't have it. And yeah, I'm trying to think what else we can dig into here. Well, what haven't we touched? I know your story is really big, but compressed. And
I just want to be like, well, what are you curious about? Yeah, what haven't we touched?
So have you seen, well, okay, this might be
go.
awkward, but I'll go there. So like, have you seen insensitive, like cultural situations at psychedelic ceremonies? So like, kind of like white people focused stuff that made you uncomfortable, and probably they could have tweaked a couple things to make you feel better in session.
With plant medicines, I've been fortunate. I've been fortunate to
Good.
only sit in really good circles, and the only ones I've sat in have honestly been like indigenous based or like different cultures leading.
Mm-hmm.
But in other forms of spiritual circles, absolutely, very much so.
Mm.
I've had a lot of issues running into spiritual leaders in Boulder specifically
Mm-hmm.
with different traditions such as Zen Buddhism.
I had a lot of problems in Boulder too,
You have a lot of
but I can only imagine. I had a lot of problems in Boulder as well with a lot of those folks.
Okay.
So I understand. Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah.
Zen, what other groups?
Zen Buddhism, Sufism.
Mm-hmm.
Those were the more like ones that I felt very uncomfortable in, just because of the dynamics, you know? There really are rarely any Black women, but in plant medicine circles too. Like, so I most of them that I've sat in, I've always been the only Black person, which has been interesting, you know, and just even being in the jungle and having that experience with that person, I was the only female as well.
Mm.
You know, so that was uncomfortable. But so far I've been okay. It's just for me, I have a difficult time being placed on platforms like for shamanic drumming, like, you know, like I'll see ads for like shamanic drumming, Michael Harner, but it's like always like a person who looks a certain way. And I've never seen anyone that looks like me, or, well, why not get someone like me? And I, you know, and I've tried reaching out to people like that, but it's definitely challenging in that sense. And so that's why I'm so appreciative of like you even giving me the chance to be here. Because, you know, I think it's important. I think it's important for people to see someone who's multi-raced, who's diverse, and who's passionate and an advocate for psychedelics, especially considering the few people that even know, you know, within our community, how many people don't know what it is.
Or how helpful it could be, right? Like it's, you know, I can totally understand how there's kind of like a cultural communication barrier. Like you said, like those are white people drugs earlier. Like it's still like a big situation. One of our advisory board members, Kwasi, told me at one point, like, you know, I don't know that we necessarily need to like urgently bring psychedelics into Black communities, but we do need to bring mental health care urgently into these communities. Like, let's start with the basics, you know, and we can get a little bit more sophisticated as time goes on, right?
Yes.
And you know, it's critical. Like I remember reading a little while ago about micro expressions over time triggering PTSD. Like no specific traumatic events, but like, so I see you somewhere and I immediately look away. Like, oh, Black person, let me cover my eyes, you know, like I don't know how to act because it's not a white person, you know, like, so like that kind of thing just really adds up and can like give people full tilt PTSD. And it's everywhere, right? And this is not necessarily a very Black friendly country. You know, we're living through that right now. And hopefully this whole series of protests cleans that up, but it's like really traumatic for folks.
It's really traumatic for folks. I think even like today, I didn't even realize I was driving by a cop, and it's what you're talking about, those micro expressions. Like I saw him, and so I immediately put my drink down subconsciously because like, oh my gosh, I don't want to get pulled over because I'm drinking. And he saw me do that, and he instantly turned away because I could, you know, the cops are feeling it too. But it's a lot, you know, and I think also like what would be important in a lot of Black communities would be just, I don't want to use the word education because I feel like there's a bad rap around people in Black communities are not educated, but I think it would be good to like give resources to information about how marijuana can help mental health, for example, because then there's like a reduction of abusing it and not benefiting from the health properties.
Yeah, that's a big deal. Absolutely. Like, how can we more skillfully use it? Totally. Yeah, I think in time, like, I hope it doesn't sound insensitive or anything, but I'm just hoping more people come online and start sharing more and more. And I think that is happening.
I think so.
You know, social media is giving us a lot of courage to come forward. And, you know, as like, you know, if somebody started, like, if some of your friends from Miami started seeing you talk like this, they might be curious, like, oh, like maybe I want to dig in to ayahuasca or, you know, mediumship or whatever. because it rhymes with the voodoo traditions that are just kind of a lot of voodoo and like Santeria and whatnot in Miami.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of not really discussed much, but it is.
Oh yeah. It's a lot. There's a lot. And it's not discussed. I think both Miami and New Orleans probably have the most. But yeah, for sure. Sport.
Yeah. Like I always make a point of going into the voodoo shops in New Orleans, but I haven't seen one in Miami yet. I'd love to. Be an interesting scene. But yeah, it's, like in the transgender community, like if they don't see somebody representing themselves like as a psychedelic person or a therapist or whatever, like they're like, maybe it's not safe for me because those people don't seem to be represented. And like same thing could be happening for Black folks. And like, of course, like if you see half the people at a conference are Black, like maybe you do want to go.
Right.
Maybe it's not just like white professors kind of talking about their papers,
Right. So then I think a lot of people are curious, and I mean, who wouldn't be curious during times like right now? Going through what we're going through collectively, considering that our crisis, our global collective is in crisis. That affects the personal too. And so I think a lot of people would be curious to something that can actually potentially help, develop the personal growth within oneself. But they're just, a lot of people don't know.
Right. There's this fun idea I ran into. I forget where it was, but it's about like perhaps traditional use cases for ayahuasca might not have been to heal the individual, but it was always about like healing the group.
Wow.
And the shaman would go out to maybe make small adjustments to the universe here and there. But the group, I was like, oh, that's a really interesting thing. It's like more like if we are that connected, like does our day-to-day really reflect that? Do our religious practices reflect that? And how could we reflect it more? Mm-hmm. Or like our relationship to the earth being a little deeper. Right. Like earth being just an extension of our bodies in a lot of ways. And that's kind of like
right.
Kind of a big deal.
I mean, you would think it should be, considering, we're walking on it every day, all day, and it's supporting us 24/7 and rejecting itself with all the abuse we give it, you would think. So I think that would be, I think that would be great.
Yeah. So kind of curious, like in your observation of psychedelic culture to date, is there anything kind of like obviously missing or like obviously problematic from your perspective?
I would say kind of what we were just touching on. I think kind of for it being such an expansive tool at people to a level of expansion, I would think it would be much more diverse. And so I would say that would be especially for something that's meant to assist all people in some shape or form. I would say that's probably the biggest downfall.
Right. Yeah. It's our definition that we typically use is like psychedelics are non-specific amplifiers of mental process or psychic process. So like it can amplify narcissism. It can amplify greed. Like I always like to remind folks that Charles Manson did happen, and he was very influenced by psychedelics, and I think Jim Jones as well, and probably numerous other cults.
That's true. Right.
Right. So like, how do we be aware of that and like try to take a skillful tact towards inclusion and growth and not just being kind of focused on the self?
The self as in like the
small s self, ego mind. Like, how do I get a bigger bank account and like a bigger house?
That's the key. It's funny because I think out of my personal dieta experience, that was the biggest thing I gained. And I'm still working on that on a personal level. How do I take this ego out? Because that was direct messaging from the medicine. It's like, how do we live in a state where we can be confident in ourselves? Because it's not like, we don't want no ego. Because, if you have no ego, then you're going to feel like you're worthless all the time. But in that sense of, I don't know if you're familiar with Atman. Yeah. Atman, in the sense of where we can connect on a level from heart to heart, and like, I see you and you see me. And it's not this competitive rat race that we're all like mentally caught up in because of narcissism. like they say that like all children are narcissistic. Great. Okay, fine. To some degree, but then it's like you see it in these people, like you're mentioning, these levels of sociopaths and psychopaths, and it's like, how do we, even in conducting these ceremonies, how do we, as people who are holding space for these ceremonies, not get into that narcissistic cult vibe? Because you see it in the plant medicine circles all the time, and I've even seen leaders say, "I'm not a guru. I'm not going to be a guru," but everything they're behaving as is this cult leader.
Mm-hmm. Right. Sometimes all it takes is saying I'm not one. They go, okay, cool. Like Scientology, not a cult. Yeah, sure, dude. Uh-huh. And yeah, like like we've got to take lessons from elsewhere and reflect it back on our communities to go, are we healthy? Are we doing things appropriately? Are we helping make certain animals and plants go extinct by our use? Like peyote is really threatened, and it's a really sad thing. And same thing with the Bufal varius toad in the Sonoran Desert, like outside Phoenix. And it's a really scary thing.
It's scary.
Like I don't know if you're aware, like Mike Tyson is kind of teamed up with a kind of nasty shaman.
Really? Oh, I didn't hear about that.
Dr. Gerardo Sandoval, Jerry Sandoval.
Hear about that.
From what I understand. And this website, 5meodmtmalpractice.org. Google it. Don't type it into your browser. It'll show up. It kind of gives a lot of public complaint about Jerry Sandoval. And it's really uncomfortable to me that he's getting so much press.
It's uncomfortable that he is, you said?
Jerry Sandoval is, yeah. And, in extension, like the toads possibly going extinct from celebrities pushing these things.
That's why it's going.
When they could use... It's one of the reasons. It's one of the impacts. Climate change, like overharvesting. There's disease transmission from people going around the desert and like transmitting fungus to these toads that could kill them. So it's not even like overharvesting. It's just humans being there can cause a lot of harm if they're not careful. And a lot of the harvesting practices are really gross. Like they take them 20 kilometers away and they can only go home if they're like, I don't know, like a kilometer or less away from home. So they just die from not knowing how to defend themselves. It's a really sad situation. I hope people just slow down use on that and perhaps use synthetic when it's available, because there's actually zero data suggesting that toad venom itself is better.
They're equally.
Right. Very, like, the better thing about the synthetic is you can actually dose specifically. You're like, okay, I want this many milligrams, as opposed to like with the toad venom, like it's a guessing game. It's like plus minus a certain percentage of content, plus all the other stuff that you don't really know what's in there, and how it impacts folks. Everybody says it's really safe, but I'm kind of like not a believer yet. If synthetic is doing just fine, then why have anything to do with the toads?
And who's administering the synthetic? Is it people like him?
He's more of a toad person. A lot of the more culty people are into toad stuff, but there's also plenty of people on both camps. Bad actors and good actors using synthetic as well. And, largely good actors using pure toad too, but, not necessarily recognizing how at risk the toad population is. It's a little creepy.
That's creepy. That's sad. So
like, I don't always like to be like the psychedelic cheerleader. I like to kind of be a buzzkill sometimes, just so people know, let's do less harm, please.
Please, right. Our whole climate, please.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's not just humans. It's not just you and your family. It's the whole world living in diverse ecosystems, intricate, soil food web stuff going on where, we can repair the planet. It's not too late. We can do this. It's just like, how do we get the consciousness to do that and the skill to do that? It's pretty attainable.
I think, it would speed up the whole process if ayahuasca was decriminalized and these medicines, I think, because it would give people these awakenings that we've experienced to some degree or another. And I think they would just then try. And that's all it is. Like, if everybody could just try, genuinely try.
Yeah. And people don't need to be perfect. You can still make mistakes.
Right.
And it's fine. Totally fine. You just got to try.
Right.
I think you're right with that. Cool. Well, Vanessa, we're at like hour 10 or so. Anything you want to put in before we kind of start to close up here?
Nothing's really coming to mind. No, unless you have any like final questions. But no, this has been great.
Yeah, it's been really fun. So I guess to recap, you're currently based in Los Angeles. You've got this master's degree from Naropa in resilient leadership. You gave a really cool talk called or at Ignite Chinooka. Is that how you say it?
Hanukkah.
Oh, should have known that. And yeah, you've got a kind of a coaching practice where people can work with you kind of closely with things. And what else do you do with people?
So I do divination readings. I do energy healings. I'm waiting to get trained on extraction. I feel like I can do it. I've been told I can do it, but I want to wait to get trained on that. And then the other cool thing is I'm starting these candles right now. I'm making self-love candles, and they're like infused with energy. So that's a pretty cool venture I'm digging in right now, which is interesting because I'm hoping I can like meet new people and talk to people through doing this, and also give them something that's of hopefully value to them, you know?
You've just said a lot of things that I want to dig into, but really quick, have you bumped into this woman who wrote Sister of Darkness, Chronicles of a Modern Exorcist?
No.
She's in Los Angeles.
Really?
And she's like a really popular exorcist. Rachel H. Stavis, Stavis. I'll email you the name of the book. And she might be an interesting read for you at the very least if you're interested in that stuff.
Okay.
I don't know what to exactly make of the book, but it was really interesting at the very least. My girlfriend's read it 5 times. So it's good.
That's
really good. And how do people find your website?
Oh, sure. It's I'm easiest to find on Instagram, and that's at Vanessa Soul, SOULXO. And it's the regular spell,
cool.
Vanessa. And then my website's just www.vanessasoulxo.com.
Cool. And we'll have links in the show notes, and I'm sure we'll have links in Instagram and all that to your site as well. So it's been really fun, Vanessa. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story with us and letting me riff a little bit too. It was really fun. So I hope to do it again.
Yes.
And take care.
You too. Bye.
And there you have it, everybody. Vanessa LeMaistre. Thank you for joining us, Vanessa. It was really fun having you, and hope to do it again. This is a fun conversation for me to explore these kind of spiritual topics. I don't really get to talk about it too often, and it's fun. And I hope you learned something. At the very least, please take away that there's people out there that this is their worldview. This is how they operate. And there's a lot of us. So, just try to be sensitive to it. Like if you're not aware of how this works, or it's not really compatible with your kind of behaviorist worldview, like that's okay. But understand that perhaps you might not be the best therapist for somebody that, this is their worldview. Or how could you change your practice to kind of accommodate these folks a little bit better? So, and, not to mention, like, there's just a vast range of experience that exists outside of the university world. There's so much happening in the Amazon. There's so much happening in various communities around the world that, is not going to be captured in university research for at least, another 10, 20 years. So this stuff is going on. It's happening. It's real. So I think if you want to be a really well-rounded person in this space, it's just worth understanding what's going on here and how you might be able to maybe taste it a little bit or get some experience. And yeah, so I think that's it. So thank you for tuning in, and we will see you on the next episode. This is Joe Moore signing off for Psychedelics Today. See you next time.